infrastructure, it seems to be probably one of the biggest common consensus now. US is proposing infrastructure plan. EU has launched 300 billion euro gateway. And we know that Second World War, when there's a crisis, catastrophe, the reimburse of the Bretton Woods system, that supported the world. Every bank maybe can work together for the infrastructure so that we can survive the next half century for the prosperity for the developing countries, and so that we have a big pie to work with among China, EU, and US, so that we can probably even set a international development alliance tackling this issue, have a joint project co-financing. And as you said, let's get all those international activities, global governance, improve, enhance, so that we can really avoid this geopolitical conflict. What do you think about those things that we can do together as your authority on World Bank as well?
I very much like to tell the story of the meeting that President Reagan had with Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev in 1985. They went for a walk together, just the two of them, with only their interpreters. And at one point, out of nowhere, President Reagan said to Mikhail Gorbachev, if the Martians came and attacked the United States, would you help defend us? And Premier Gorbachev looked very surprised, laughed, and said, of course we would. If Martians came and attacked the USSR, would you come to defend us? And President Reagan laughed and said that, of course, he would. After that moment, their relationship was a much better one. Well, I don't expect that there will be any attack on the United States or China or anyone else on Earth from Mars. But I do think that humanity and our planet is existentially challenged in a way that it never has been before, by climate change, by pandemic disease, by threats of nuclear proliferation and terrorism. And so I think that we do have common adversaries. And I think that international relations for thousands of years has been about balancing power in a stable way. And that continues to be very important. But it is also about achieving cooperation with respect to threats that endanger all. And I believe that that's why there needs to be a rethinking, a replenishing, and a renewing of the development banking system. And I believe that responsibility for that rethinking, replenishing, and renewing has to rest with the two great economic powers in the world, China and the United States. And I believe that cooperation in the development banks can be an important part of what President Xi has called a different kind of great power relationship. What does that mean? I believe that the World Bank should no longer be named the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The most important investments that need to be made are investments in sustainability, in green infrastructure and architecture, and in global public goods. And it needs to be much more engaged in financing them, not just on its own, but with partners from the private sector, partners from national development banks. And it needs to pursue a common agenda of all nations and be a place where nations cooperate together. The World Bank, I believe, should be at the tip of the armada, but it certainly should not be the only ship in the armada. We need development banks to finance the investments that are central for global challenges. And I believe that can be an enormously important project on which China and the United States can cooperate, even if they do have major differences on technology, major differences on the geopolitics of the Pacific region.
And as you said, also having the private sector, capital markets join that, probably can be a new forces in, a new model for the post-pandemic era. Absolutely, this is really great ideas, and I think China and US are the two key players that we should really, plus EU, we should all work together on that. Now, I like to maybe shift the subject a little bit on China now, US-China relation. I mean, during your visit to CCG in 2019, you talked about the changes are taking place in China, that the history of the first half century of the 21st century revolution is likely to be substantially a history of what happens in China and how that affects this fifth of the humanity. And China's transformation rise are likely to impact the balance of power and result in he hit his trap, actually. So probably we're getting into some kind of a competition cooperation, but still, cooperation can still be maintained and some kind of partnership. So what do you think about the US-China relation, in the post-pandemic era, how we can really, get along and while managing the risk?
Henry, I've compared the US-China relationship to two individuals who have relatively little in common and who have substantial feelings of discomfort and distrust with respect to each other, who share a lifeboat with two oars in a turbulent sea a long way from the shore. And they may be right in their grievances with respect to each other. They may be right in their aspirations as to who should be in charge. But the reality is that unless they row relatively in unison for quite a long time, without the distractions of anger and conflict, they are not going to make it to the shore. And that is how I think the United States and China need to understand each other. I find that much of the discussion, should we have co-opetition? Should we have engagement with competition? Should we have strategic engagement? Should we have cooperation, selective cooperation? There's a war on to define a phrase that captures what we're going to have. If I had to use one word, I think the word I would use is co-opetition, to capture the idea that there's both going to be competition and there's going to need to be areas of cooperation. But I think ultimately we need to decide what it is that we want that is realistic to have. I don't think it is realistic for China to aspire to displace the United States as the world's leading economic power. I don't think it is realistic for China to aspire to a vision of the Asian continent in which the United States is not an active economic, political, and security participant. At the same time, I don't think it is realistic for the United States to aspire to the kind of unipolar hegemonic world that many in the United States talked about after the Berlin Wall fell. I think China has too many achievements and has done too much for that to be a realistic American aspiration. And I think we in the United States, after almost a century when it was otherwise, need to accommodate ourselves to the fact that we are not going to be the world's largest and completely dominant economy forever. And so we need to define a vision in which we both prosper, we both respect each other's ability to run our systems internally as we see fit, but we both agree on international rules of the road where there is interaction, whether it is competition between companies, whether it is rules with respect to the deployment of troops and weapons, whether it is understandings with respect to external countries. And so I think that is what we need to try to work out together. And it will be an immense diplomatic challenge. But I think that it is important that we start from a sense of what we ultimately want to achieve and go from there to a range of specific approaches, rather than, as is too often the case, a strategy is conflated with a wish list. It seems to me that it's in both of our interests for us both to conduct our relationship in the next years in ways that allow us each to renew our societies domestically. You know, there are some in China, let me be frank. There are articles in the Global Times suggesting that the United States is in decline and that this is China's moment when China has to move and take advantage of the situation. If the United States perceives that that is the broad strategy China is following, we will have no choice but to respond in very strong and vigorous ways. Equally, if China perceives that the United States has an objective of containment or of regime change or of bringing about fundamental changes in the nature of internal Chinese society, that is something that you're not going to be able to accept. And so it seems to me that the provision of strategic reassurance, not just in words, but in deeds, needs to be an important aspect of the dialogues that take place between our leaders.